Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Tanya lesson. Tonight, we begin chapter 12. Last week, I shared with you an introduction. I do not wish to repeat the same introduction. Just to summarize again, in the past 11 chapter, the Rebbe was able to expose us to three concepts in Kabbalistic terminologies. The first is the souls, that there is an animal soul and a godly soul. The second is that there are powers. Each person is comprised of 10 powers, 3 in the brain, 7 in the heart are emotional, so there are 10 attributes. They are the powers that are motivating us or give us reasons or bring us pleasure. And the third concept the Rabbi was teaching us is garments. There are 3 garments to each human being: male, female, child, adults, thought, speech, and action. They are directly affected or impacted by the 10 powers. So someone who is very emotional will express it in speech and action and thought. Someone who is very intellectual, you can find out about the person just by observing the way they speak, what they say, where they like to be, where they find themselves. In other words, the 10 powers are the root that motivates and creates thought, speech, and action. These are the 3 concepts that we have discovered in the past 11 months. We also discovered the idea of the 4 levels of humanity. There are 2 types of wicked, 2 types of righteous. Now we're coming to the Beinoni. Beinoni in Hebrew is middle, the middle person, or in the middle is Beinoni. I'm going to start reading, as I said, because we spoke about last week the introduction to chapter 12 and the idea of what a Beinoni is, and it will be reflected in the text. I'm reading in the Lessons of Tanya on page 174. In the previous chapters, the Alter Rebbe defined the term tzaddik and rasha. The tzaddik, he explained, is one in whom the good qualities of his divine soul vanquish the evil qualities of his animal soul to the extent of completely eradicating them. So a tzaddik is defined not by the action, but by the souls, that the godly soul is so powerful that it eradicates the evil soul, either completely removing it, or did not remove it completely, but at least causing it to have no impact at the human being. A rasha, conversely, is one in whom the evil qualities of his animal soul overcome the good of his divine soul, causing him to sin in thought, speech, and action. A rasha, a wicked person, is not defined as someone who has a lot of bad. A rasha is someone whose animal soul is in control. She is running the show and not allowing the godly soul to rule, either forever by removing the godly soul completely, and that's a complete rasha, or an incomplete rasha whose godly soul is still there but dormant, is asleep, and wakes up from time to time when there is a holiday, when there is a celebration, when there is a awakening or a special occasion, the godly soul will rule. But otherwise, the majority of his life follows the animal soul. These are the 2 categories of wicked and tzaddik. In this, the 12th chapter, the term Beinoni, which is the intermediate man, who is neither a tzaddik nor rasha, will be defined. So again, this chapter and the rest of the book will be dealing with the man who is not a tzaddik, but not a rasha. He is right in the middle of the road. We call it Beinoni. The Beinoni, the Alter Rebbe explains, is one whose practical conduct is in thought, speech, and action is dictated solely by the divine soul. It has the upper hand over the animal soul. The Beinoni accomplishes this by not allowing himself to be dominated in any way by the animal soul, even for the shortest duration, never thinking, speaking, and surely not acting in a sinful manner. The garments of the divine soul alone, namely thought, speech, and action in Torah and mitzvot, are those used by the Beinoni. A Beinoni, intermediary person, will only allow the godly soul to dictate his behavior, his speech, and his thought. He will think, he will speak, he will act only as the godly soul dictates. So which garments does he wear? Thought, speech, and action are garments. He wears the godly soul garments all the time without an exception. If there is an exception, it cannot be called a Beinoni. A Beinoni in the action and speech and thought is literally exactly like a tzaddik. There is no difference. Nevertheless, with respect to the essence of the divine and animal souls, that is, the respective faculties of intellect and emotions, the divine soul does not dominate the animal soul, and the latter remains powerful enough to arouse desires for physical matters. However, through constant vigilance, the Beinoni keeps these desires in check, never permitting them any practical manifestation. Says the Rebbe, the powers, the 10 attributes are equally powerful of the animal soul and the godly soul. In that regard, the powers of the human, the 10 attributes, the animal soul and the wicked person and the Beinoni are equally the same. They have two souls who constantly fight, and the animal soul will constantly try to make us jealous, to make us speak slander, to make us act inappropriately. However, being a Beinoni, he controls his action, he controls his speech, he controls his thought. However, barring action, speech, and action, speech, and thought, which are garments, looking internally, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a wicked person and a Beinoni. They both struggle, and they both have equal powers that are fighting each other. The only difference is a wicked person will allow, the animal soul will be able to express itself in the garments, whereas with a Beinoni, it will never come into those garments. I hope I made myself clear. Nevertheless, I'm sorry. Now the Rebbe starts. The Beinoni, intermediate man, is he in whom the evil of the animal soul never attains enough power to conquer the small city, that is the body, which is likened to a small city, which the divine and animal soul both wish to dominate. We studied that before in chapter 6 and 7, that there is a small city, the human being, and there are two kings who are fighting over who is going to dominate the city, godly soul and animal soul. In this regards, the animal soul will never be able to conquer the city, but it constantly fights again and over and again and again. It will have unlimited resources of ammunition. It will try to bomb and shell and dig holes in the wall, work as hard as it can to penetrate and conquer the city, so as to clothe itself in the body and make it sin. That is to say, the three garments of the animal soul, namely thought, speech, and action, originating in Klippa, that is forbidden thought, speech, and action, which derive the vitality from Klippa as explained in previous chapters, are in the Beinoni so subdued that they do not prevail within him over the divine soul to the extent of clothing themselves in the body. Says the Rebbe, they are as equal powerful as the godly soul. However, they are not powerful enough to conquer the city and allow the person to dress in the garments of the animal soul to sin. He explains, neither in the brain, so that the brain thinks forbidden thoughts with the animal soul's garments of thought, nor in the mouth to speak forbidden words, the garments of speech, nor in any other 248 organs to act in forbidden matters, the garments of action. In none of these do the garments of the animal soul clothe themselves to cause them to sin and to defile them. God forbid, in which case it would be a Rasha, not a Benoni. If the animal soul is able to clothe the human in the garments of the animal soul of speech, thought, and action, even one time, he is already degraded to the level of Rasha, of a wicked. He is not a Benoni. If there is no fight, internally there is no fight, there is no conflict, he is not a Benoni, he's a righteous man, because a righteous man don't have that struggle. A Benoni will continuously have the struggle. So again, when it comes to the garments, speech, thought, and action, he is like a tzaddik. When it comes to the powers, motivating the person, or trying to conquer the city, he's like a wicked man. There is a fire burning internally constantly. He has a addiction. He has a desire. He wants it. He was raised that way. His parents told him it's okay. All his neighbors are behaving that way. It doesn't matter what the excuse. The animal soul will be there fighting. The defining definition of a Benoni is not someone who is not addicted, is not someone who is not struggling, is not someone who was raised properly with the proper behavior without any deviation from proper behavior. The defining Benoni is the one who says, stop, my action, my speech, and my thought will not be allowed by the animal soul to behave. And in that way, that defines him as a Benoni, which is, as we'll discover, a much greater service of God than a tzaddik, because a tzaddik don't have that struggle. A Benoni will have this struggle every moment of the day. Only the three garments of the divine soul, they alone manifest themselves in the body, these being the thought, speech, and action related to the 613 commandments of the Torah. So when it comes to the garments, it's only the godly soul. The animal soul has no entrance, no permit. And in that way, it's not because it's easy. It's not because he knows what's right. That's not true. He only does it because, as we'll discover soon, he wants to serve God, realizing that's the reason God sent him here. And he knows that serving God means not allowing the animal soul to rule in the garments. The fact that he has an animal soul that wants him to get addicted to bad behavior, to speak, to get angry, to stay in bed longer, to skip a mitzvah, is a very natural occurrence that God created us with, because he is planted by us the godly and animal soul. So there is a constant fight. The goal is to not allow it to penetrate or to spill over to the garments. The Benoni has never committed any transgression, nor will ever transgress. The name Rasha has never been applied to him, however temporarily, not even for a moment throughout his life. And the Rebbe will qualify what we just studied. The Alter Rebbe says that a Benoni needs to be in such a strong position that the actual behavior in thought, speech, and action is always into the godly side, that if you look at him, it's as if he had never sinned once in his life and will never sin again. And as the Rebbe will explain, a very simple question: every person has a free choice. We know of many righteous men who ended up sinning. We know that we ask forgiveness every year. How is it possible to say that? And here is the Rebbe will explain. The Rebbe notes, the question is well known. That is, with regards to the statement that a Benoni is one who has never transgressed, the following question is commonly raised: is it not possible through repentance and subsequent divine service that one attains the rank of a Benoni despite his previous sins? After repenting, one can rise even to the level of tzaddik. Surely then the rank of Benoni is not beyond his reach. The Alter Rebbe writes that he never sinned before, never will sin. In other words, the garments have never been enclosed by the animal soul. So the Rebbe, there is a common question. We have people who had seen, and they can do teshuvah and become even a tzaddik. How is the Alter Rebbe says that the Beinoni has never seen before and will never see again in the future? The Rebbe answers this question in the following manner. When the Alter Rebbe states that the Beinoni has never transgressed, he does not mean that the Beinoni never sinned in his life as a human being, but that in his life as a Beinoni, he has no history of sin. The Beinoni present spiritual state is such that sin in the past as well as in the future has no place in his life. He would not sin even if he were subject to the same temptation and trials which led him to sin in the past. It is therefore true to state that from the perspective of his present state, he has never sinned. The Rebbe explains that looking at the Beinoni struggle and being able to overcome the animal soul, it is so strong that if you give him the same challenges that you gave him before, he will not fall down. He will still stick to the way he behaves as a Beinoni. And that's what it means that he has never sinned and he will never sin again, not as a human being, but as a Beinoni. In his strong behavior and connection to God is in such a situation that you can say for sure that if you gave him the same temptation in the past that he faced in the past, or temptation he will face in the future, he will stay true to his good behavior. Likewise, the Alter Rebbe's statement of that the Beinoni will never sin is to be understood in the same vein. The intention is not that it is impossible for him to sin. He does not, after all, lose his freedom of choice. Rather, as explained above, his present state is such that it precludes his sinning in the future, despite the trials in the future that the future may bring. To be classified as a true Beinoni, one must fulfill these conditions, for if one's spiritual state precludes his sinning only under present conditions, but he would succumb to sin, where he is subject to the temptation of the past or those of the future may bring, then he is in potential rasha. He could not and would sin, except that the prevailing circumstances are not sufficiently conducive for him to do so. What the Rabbi is saying, that a Beinoni is someone who has controlled his thought, speech, and action in such a strong way that you can take all the past temptation that he faced and you put it before him, you throw it at him now, he will stick to his guns, he will still be a Beinoni and will not sin. The same is about the future. That's a Beinoni, not someone who has never sinned in his lifetime or will never sin again, because it's impossible to say it about a human being. We need to have a free choice. I'm going to share with you some stories. Two stories. One from the Zohar and another from a friend of mine, the Chabad rabbi in Boca Raton. The Zohar tells us Rabbi Abba, very famous rabbi, once traveled and he sat down to rest under a tree in the forest. He suddenly sees a person who fell asleep. He was very tired. By the river bank, he was about to fall asleep, and a large tree trunk, floated. So when he fell from the bank into the river, instead of drowning, he fell on that trunk, and he continued sleeping. He was very deep asleep. Didn't realize. Suddenly he wakes up, and as he wakes up, there is a venomous snake coming out from right next to him, and that same trunk suddenly is falling off the snake and kills the snake. And then this trunk, this bark of tree bark, disappear with the water. So Rabbi Abba turned to the man and he says, I just witnessed two miracles God created for you. One is that he saved you when you're rolling down to the river, and the trunk, that tree, saved you. You fell on that tree and you continue sleeping. The second is there was a very dangerous snake right under that tree or inside that tree, and the trunk killed that by falling on it. When you woke up, you didn't even realize. Tell me about yourself. And the man says, I don't know what to tell you, something special about me, but I know one thing. I never go to sleep before I forgive everyone who had offended me. I have a rule. I will forgive anyone that had offended, not only my children, even the members of the congregation, or my boss, or my rabbi, or my teacher. I will always turn to God and say, I forgive them completely. Rabbi Abba turned to him and he says, you're a bigger tzaddik than Yosef. We're going to talk about Yosef at the end of chapter 12. Yosef had the opportunity to repay his brothers for what they had done to him. And he says, no, God has had a plan. As we can all see the outcome, I saved the world from famine. So how can I act as God and punish you? He says to him, Yosef at least knew the people he forgave to. It was his brothers. So he wanted to connect with family. He had no family for 22 years. You are forgiving people even you don't even know. So it's a double act of kindness. That's why God created 2 miracles to save you. The story illustrates the type of what a Beinoni is defined as. A Beinoni is not someone who does not have a desire to hurt. A Beinoni is not someone who has a desire to think evil, but a Beinoni is someone who had trained himself that he will do, act, and speech and thought only the way God wants. And therefore, there is no need to hold grudges because it's against the Torah. That's one story. The second story is there is a rabbi in Coral Springs, very famous rabbi, Rabbi Yossi Denberg. He's a friend of mine. Yossi Denberg, he has a brother who is the rabbi in Boca Raton, Moshe Denberg. He's a couple of years older than me, but Rabbi Yossi Denberg, this Denberg family, they grew up in Montreal. And they had a grandfather who is a very famous rabbi from France, who would come once a year to visit the family to Montreal, Reb Nissan Nemanov. He is known as the Beinoni of Tanya. People say that he was the Beinoni of Tanya. And he would sleep, he would share the room in turn with one of the boys because their house had a lot of children. And there was no extra guest room or guest house. So where does grandfather sleeps? He would sleep. One time he visited with one boy, the next year he would sleep in the other boy's room. And Rabbi Yossi Denberg relates that one time they all knew about his greatness. He's a very great man. He turned to him and he says to him, is there a Beinoni in our universe today? Is there anybody, a Beinoni? So his grandfather turned to him and he says, tell me, is it possible for you for 1 minute to do only a mitzvah and not do a sin? He says, 1 minute? For sure, yes. He says, is it possible for you for 1 minute to refrain from speaking badly? No slander, no raising voice, no wasting time, no wasting words, just speaking holy words, Torah. He says, for 1 minute, of course. He says, is it possible for you to control your thoughts, to think only positive? Don't wish unwell for a fellow human being. Don't think negative. Just think 1 minute, only positive. He says to him, yes. He says, well, you know what life is? 1 minute and another minute and another minute. All of life is made out of a single minute. So, in other words, what he was saying to him is, if you control yourself for 1 minute, you're a Beinoni at that minute. If you control yourself another minute, you're a Beinoni another minute. So it is possible for us to reach that level. Instead of looking at the lifespan and saying, oh, it's so hard, not even necessary to look at a day, not even an hour, 1 minute. 1 minute a day to be a Beinoni. Not allow anyone, any thought to enter our mind that's inappropriate, not allow any speech or action that is inappropriate. And If you pray to God or you study Torah, you are able to make sure to control yourself for 1 minute, and then you take another minute and another minute. But that minute, you become a Beinani. The rabbi is going to speak about certain times of day or of the year where it's a very easy to be a Beinani. We continue on page 177. It remains to be understood, however, why such a lofty person is considered merely a Beinani, not a tzaddik. This matter is now clarified. In other words, if a Beinani will never sin by thinking inappropriately, by speaking, or by acting inappropriately, why is it he's calling a Beinani? Why don't you call him a tzaddik? He does not have a single sin to his record. Says the Rebbe, however, the essence and being of the divine soul, which are its 10 faculties, the 3 soul powers of intellect and the 7 emotional faculties are referred to as essence of the divine soul, in contrast with the soul's garments, thought, speech, and action, which serve merely as outlets and means of expression of the soul's essence faculties, do not hold undisputed sovereignty and sway over the small city, the body. The Rebbe says the reason you don't call him a tzaddik is because he has no control over the city. The small city is the human being, the human body. The human body does not have a clear king that rules. The godly soul is not the only king. You have an animal soul who is fighting in this constant fight, and you're not sure who is going to rule. For, as shall be explained later, the faculties of the animal soul too exercise some degree of control over the body, through awakening in one's heart desires for worldly pleasures, which in turn cause forbidden thoughts to enter his mind. The human being as a Beinani will have the animal soul continuously pumping the human being to think or act or speak inappropriately. That's why the first thought that will enter many times would be a negative one. I think last week I spoke about that always. The idea is, what's the second thought, not the first. Did we talk about the second thought last week? We did. So let me repeat it very briefly. There is no way we can control our thoughts. Some people, by the way, some people think that action is easy to control. You just hold your hands and you're not going to walk anywhere not appropriate. You're not going to do anything wrong. Is it easy to control your speech? Depends who you're talking to. Some people it's impossible. Some people it's difficult, but everybody has their own measure of control. But it's possible. Thinking, however, is it possible for me to control my thoughts? When I see someone great success and I wish him not well, or when I decide that tomorrow I get contemplating and involving my brains with negative thoughts, how I wish on that person such and such, etc. It seems that you don't have a switch that you can turn off your thoughts. Action you can control. Speech you can control. I spoke about it on Shabbos day. And you missed it, right? On Shabbat day I spoke. I had a whole speech prepared, but for the sake of those who study Tanya, I didn't want to say it. But I mentioned that. That's one point I talked about Shabbat, yes.
I knew I heard it too.
Right. Action is something somehow we can control. Speech, it's a little difficult, but it's possible. Thought, you can switch off, you can turn off. Speech, you can saw your lips, and that's it. You're not going to talk any bad. But how is it possible to control some intellect, thoughts? What the Rabbi is explaining, and he will explain later, is that the first thought that enters my mind does not count. It doesn't matter. But the question is, what happens the second thought? If I say to myself, I have a partner and he is not good and I'm going to yell at him, and that's a natural instinct that enters my mind. You know why? because I'm a Benoni. I wish, but that's the desire of a Benoni. He has the animal soul pumping negative thoughts. If I care about serving God, I say to myself, how dare you think that way? It's not according to Allah, it's inappropriate. And I stop thinking that way. In other words, therefore, the first thought does not count. If the first thought is a very negative, inappropriate against God, it is acceptable for a Benoni. For a tzaddik, you would never have that, because naturally he's only thinking positive. The Benoni does have negative thoughts, which comes from the animal soul. However, the idea is the second thought is where it has to come and be blocked and be concentrating only on serving God and what's right. Let's continue. For as shall be explained later, the faculties of the animal soul too exercise some degree of control over the body through awakening in one's heart desire for worldly pleasures, which in turn cause forbidden thoughts to enter his mind. Only at specific times, due to the faculties of divine soul hold undisputed sovereignty over the Benoni with the animal soul having no effect whatsoever on him, such as during the recital of the Shema or the Amidah. At this time of prayer, the supernal intellect above is in a sublime state. It is a time of great illumination in that higher world. So what the Rabbi is explaining is that there are times that are unique times. I'm going to use an example. When you say the Shema, when you pray the Shema, you can be awakened to be thinking only positive thoughts. What happened after the Shema? All the negative thoughts will enter back because the animal soul is there. What happens on Yom Kippur, at Ne'ilah or at Kol Nidre? You are pure and you want to connect to God. You want to do what's right. At that point, the animal soul is asleep. Is not bothering you. What happens after? The animal soul wakes back. Did I fake it on Ne'ilah? Did I fake it on Yom Kippur when I have good resolutions, when I promise God to be perfect? There is no faking it because it was the godly soul, the only one ruling. And after, the animal soul comes back to the arena and starts fighting, punching the animal soul. And the fact that some of my behavior is not going to be the way I wanted is, I'm sorry, if I'm a Benoni, the behavior will be the proper way. But the fact that I have a desire to speak or a desire to act or a desire to think negative thoughts or inappropriate behavior is only because the animal soul is in full swing. The Benoni, as opposed to a Rasha, a wicked, will control it and not allow it to rule. The wicked person will allow it to spill out and in action, speech, and thought. Likewise, below, in this physical world, the time of prayer is propitious for every man to ascend to a higher spiritual level. So when up in above, it's a special time, Shabbat, Shema, Yom Kippur, my birthday, it is a very special time for me to connect with my godly soul without a fight. This is a time that's easier for us to make resolutions. This is a time easy for us to behave properly. Then, during the recital of Shema or during prayer, the Benoni binds his Chabad, Chokhmah Bin Adat, the intellectual faculties consisting of Chokhmah Bin Adat, to God, meditating deeply on the greatness of the Blessed Ein Sof and arousing through this meditation a burning love of God in the right part of his heart. For as explained in previous chapters, meditation on God's greatness arouses the love of him within one's heart. When he contemplates and thinks about God, as we spoke about chapters 7, 8, 9, it creates a love and yearning to connect to God. That hopefully will last a little longer. And arousing This love, in turn, leads the Benoni to desire to cleave to him by means of fulfilling the Torah and its commandments out of love. And the rabbi is going to continue on about the idea of Shema. I just want to share with you the following. If we have a moment in time during the day in which we connect to God and allowing us to have the godly soul fully open and flourishing, it affects the entire day and makes challenges a bit easier to overcome. This is, the Rebbe is talking about a Benoni, but it's not just for Benoni. There was it's a story. The details are not that important, but I don't know how I share the story without the details. There was a yeshiva somewhere in Poland that the yeshiva boys were gathered to that yeshiva about 100 years ago in the synagogue for a year, supposed to be there for a year and a half before they be accepted in Lubavitch, in the big mother of yeshivas. However, they were very advanced students, and after less than a year, they felt that they have completed all that's necessary, and they want to be accepted in the yeshiva in Lubavitch. By the way, in those days, there was no year. Like today, we have a year, just like we have a semester. So there was month. The year is divided into two parts. So you can be accepted in the first part or the second part. And there is no such thing as a year. So the yeshiva boys sent a message to the Rebbe, who was in charge of the yeshiva, that they are wishing to and be accepted to yeshiva, even though it's a little early, but they felt that they have completed all the study in Hasidic teaching and in the Torah, in the Talmud, that's required for Yonah. The Rebbe, in turn, sent out a spiritual leader and a Rosh Yeshiva, someone he decided to test them. So he sent two men. One is the Hasidic master to teach them about their knowledge in Hasidic teaching and Kabbalah, and the other one is Talmud, if they are able to, if they've accomplished what they're supposed to say. When the Hasidic Hasidic master, Dean, arrived and he started, he gathered them all together, and he says, I have a practical question for you. Instead of asking them, what does this text means, and how do you explain this text, and how do you answer that question? He turns to him and says, I have a practical question, I want to see if you can answer. He says, imagine you're riding on a wagon, a horse and wagon, and suddenly a very negative desire enters your mind. But at the same time, there is another wagon with hooligans that are coming in, and they're about to attack you. They're going to throw rocks, they're going to burn you, they're going to try to hurt you. How do you get rid of the evil desire? So, did you understand the question? Yeah. So the person who wrote this memoir says that everybody started coming up with, oh, you start awakening your love for God, so the love for God will remove the evil desire, because we study, if you love God, you hate something that hates God, etc., if you remember what we studied. And another one says, no, you have fear of God and you have fear of punishment. And this teacher says, I don't understand you. The guy, if he's going to start waking up the love of God or the fear of God, those hooligans are going to burn him alive. Who has time not to contemplate? And there was nobody answer. So then he turned to this particular yeshiva boy and says, what do you have to say? How can you answer? He says, you know, we studied in chapter 12 that if once a day, 1 minute a day, you are able to connect to God on a great level and the godly soul is in full control, it will leave a taste for the rest of the day. And therefore, it's much easier to defeat that thought. You say to yourself, that's not right. You say to yourself, that's not what God wants. And even at a very challenging moment when you have hooligans are about to attack you, the fact that you had that connection in the morning or a certain moment where the only one that rules my life is the godly soul, that, so to say, leftover, that taste aftertaste will enable us to get rid of the desire immediately. And the teacher, the master says to him, you're right. That's the answer I was looking for. In other words, it's not just the value of the moment where we connect completely with God, but it also affects the entire day. If we have a moment where we are a Benoni, where only the godly soul rules, thought, speech, and action, during the day when we face challenges of thought, speech, and action, we can always tap back to that moment, and it enables us or gives us the power, overpowering the animal soul. Likewise, a little more will do. We are on page 178. The realization that only the fulfillment of Torah and mitzvot will fulfill his desire to become one with God channels the Benoni's love into the desire to observe Torah and mitzvot. This arousal of love for God and its accompanying resolve to adhere to Torah and mitzvot and thereby to cleave to him is the essential subject of the Shema, which the biblical, the Oraita commandment enjoin us to recite. Why God gave us the commandment to recite the Shema once a day? The first part is Ve'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, love God you Lord. We need to have the love because when we say Shema, it's a very easy task. The problem is after saying the Shema, the animal soul is in full force. But during the Shema, there is only a godly soul, there is no animal soul. Likewise, rabbinically ordained, the Rabbanan blessings preceding and following the Shema are a preparation enabling us to fulfill that which we recite in the Shema as explained elsewhere. That's why you have blessings before Shema. There are 2 blessings in the morning before Shema and 1 blessing after. In the evening, you have 1 blessing before and 2 blessings after. The purpose of the blessing, the rabbis added to the Shema, even though there is a Shema, Shema is a commandment by God. The blessings before and after are rabbinic enactment. But the rabbis added those blessings to be able to arouse ourselves and to bring ourselves to that point of connecting to God through the Shema. At each time during the Shema or prayer, when the love of God burns in the heart of a Benoni, the evil in the left part of his heart, the animal soul's principal area of manifestation, is subjected to and is nullified before the goodness, that is, the love of God, that spreads into the right part of the heart, whereas the divine soul is manifest from the Chabad faculties in the brain, which are bound in the meditation to the greatness of the blessed Ein Sof. We're going to stop here. Now from here, the rabbi is going to talk about what happens after prayer. After prayer, the challenge is all over, all again, needs to have a full fight, just as if we did not have a prayer. So what, in summary, what we discovered today? The Benoni is someone who never sinned in the past and never will sin again, because in his state of mind right now, he guards thought, speech, and action, the garments. The garments are the most precious part because they are the one who connects him to God. And he will not allow the animal soul to rule. However, the faculties, the powers of the human, these are subjects to a bitter war between the godly and animal soul, and no one ever gives up. However, it will not spill over. The animal soul's powers will not be able to control the garments of the soul. And there is a time of day in which we can bring ourselves to become a Benoni, namely Shema, or a special moment in life when you get married, at a birthday, Yom Kippur, where the godly soul is fully manifested, even in the powers. And at that moment, the animal soul subdues itself, falling asleep, so to say, in a dormant position. However, as we'll discover next week, it will come alive as soon as we are past that moment in life or have moved on from that moment in our personality. Next week is a fast day. Monday is the fast of Gedalia, so we will skip studying. The following Monday is Yom Kippur. We will skip. The following Monday is Sukkot, and after that is Simchat Torah. So we'll skip for about a month, but then return right after the high holidays. Thank you so much, everybody. Be well, everybody.
Can I use